Good morning and welcome to Dixon's oldest radio program, The Old Timer Show. I'm your host, Justin Spurlock. The Old Timer Show debuted on January the 18th, 1958, and for almost 65 years, it's been the show that proudly celebrates Dickson County's old-timers and local history. We've got a great show lined up for you today. As many of you know, I am a history teacher, and I write an article for the newspaper every week about local history. This week's article was about Thaddeus and Hattie Wyatt Caraway. And if you don't know who they are, they were United States senators from the state of Arkansas, but what sort of made them special or relevant to us is that they went to college right here in Dixon. So let me tell you the story. It kind of goes back with Thaddeus Caraway. He was born on a farm way back in 1871, and his father, Tolbert Caraway, was a country doctor and a former Confederate soldier. When Thaddeus was only 6 months old, his father was killed in a feud, and it left his family very poor. Young Thaddeus had to work from an early age and became a farmhand by age 7. He was determined to get an education, and he attended the small school near his home in Arkansas. When he got a little bit older, he moved to Dixon, Tennessee, to attend the Dixon Normal College, where he graduated in 1896. So a little about the Dixon Normal College. It was a school that specialized in training teachers, and it was located right here in Dixon on none other than College Street, which is how College Street right here in Dixon gets its name. It existed for about 20 years in the late 1800s and early 1900s. While living in Dixon, Thaddeus met his future wife, Hattie Wyatt. Now, Hattie was also a student at the Dixon Normal College, but she was from Humphreys County, just west of Dixon. Hattie was the daughter of a relatively poor farmer, but due to the generosity of her aunt, she was able to afford to go to college, and this was at a time when very few could afford to go to college, especially young ladies. She was able to attend and graduate from the Dixon Normal College. Both Thaddeus and Hattie became teachers after graduation. They were married in 1902 and moved to Jonesboro, Arkansas. Thaddeus began studying law and eventually was admitted to the bar. He became a prosecuting attorney, but decided to get into politics. He ran for U.S. House of Representatives seat and won in 1912. He was reelected several times and served in that role until 1920, and that's when he decided to run for the U.S. Senate. He won and was even reelected to a second term in the Senate in 1926. He was a popular senator who was nationally known and recognized. His admirers included F. Scott Fitzgerald. Now, if you don't know who F. Scott Fitzgerald is, he was one of the best writers of the 1920s, better known as the Roaring Twenties here in the United States. It was an era of prosperity, and F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote the book that sort of encapsulated the era. It was known as The Great Gatsby. Now, some have speculated that Nick Carraway, who was one of the main characters in the book, The Great Gatsby, was modeled after Thaddeus Caraway. The reason some people believe this is because there was a cutout article that apparently F. Scott Fitzgerald had cut out of a newspaper, and it was in his personal scrapbook, and it was an article about Thaddeus Caraway. And in the earliest versions of the book, Nick's last name is spelled Caraway, just like Thaddeus, and There have been some articles written about this, and you can Google and look a little further into it. But there is some speculation that it's possible that Thaddeus Carraway was the person who this character was modeled after. And with that being such an important book, that is pretty interesting that he would be involved in something like that. So Thaddeus becomes a U.S. Senator, and he serves his first term. He's reelected. He's serving his second term in the Senate, and he actually dies, unfortunately, very suddenly from a heart attack, or it says heart problems, in 1930. His wife, Hattie, was nominated by the governor of Arkansas to continue Thaddeus's term until a special election could be held. And then Hattie, with the endorsement of the Democrat Party, won the special election to finish her husband's term in the Senate. And this was not uncommon at the time. But what was uncommon at the time was, women were not very involved in politics. It was very rare that a woman would be involved in politics, and women had just received the right to vote about 10 years earlier, and most women were not seen as serious political candidates. Very few women attempted to run for office, and even fewer actually won. Hattie Wyatt Carraway shocked everyone in 1932 when she decided to run on her own for the U.S. Senate seat that her husband had held. Some called her crazy. Others told her that she didn't have a chance. But Hattie made a decision, and she stuck with it. And so in 1932, which was a very interesting year, Hattie Wyatt Carraway was elected, and she became the first female senator elected to the U.S. Senate. That was also the same year that Franklin Roosevelt took office, and he was elected president. This was a time when the United States was going through the Great Depression. Many people were upset with the current president, Herbert Hoover. So when Franklin Roosevelt decided to run, he won. And one of the reasons why he probably won was because he had a plan known as the New Deal. And that was going to help get the nation out of the Great Depression. Now, Hattie Wyatt Carraway, Franklin Roosevelt, both elected in 1932, and both served around the same time through the 1930s. And this was a really tough time in United States history. Hattie was able to be reelected and served for several years in the United States Senate, but eventually lost in 1944, and that was the end of her Senate career. But she stuck around Washington, D.C., and she was nominated by two different presidents for some very prestigious jobs, and she hung around in politics until the day she died. So Hattie Wyatt Carraway, the very first woman elected to the Senate, to the U.S. Senate. She was a student right here in Dixon, Tennessee at the Dixon Normal College along with her husband. So today, the old site where the Dixon Normal College used to be is now the Dixon Middle School. And so the students who go to the Dixon Middle School today are being educated on the same grounds as two U.S. senators, and also on the site that the first female senator in U.S. history went to college. And so that is a story that I hope that you enjoyed about our local history. We're going to take a short break, and when we get back, we're going to be joined by Chad Bradford. He's going to talk to me about some more Dixon history. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back. And we're back here on the Old Timer Show, right here on WDKN, and I'm lucky to be joined on the line by Chad Bradford, who is, I consider, a local historian. Chad knows a lot about downtown Dixon and a lot about our history, and through the Facebook group Discovering Dixon County, I have done a lot of research and had a lot of conversations with Chad about multiple different topics regarding local Dixon County history. So I'm just happy that Chad can be here with us today. Start off, please, Chad. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your early life, and maybe a little bit about your family history, and sort of tell me what started your love for local history.
Okay, sure. Well, my roots are pretty deep around here. Lived here my whole life. My father's family came here, it was late 1820s, around the Hickman County line area. My mother's family is the really deep roots. Her father was full-blooded Cherokee, so it goes without saying it's been a long time around here. And my maternal grandmother's family settled in what is now Montgomery Bell Park in 1793. They were here before the state became official, and 5 generations were born there. My grandmother was the 5th generation, and she moved to downtown Dixon in 1924. I grew up listening to her stories, which were just phenomenal, of Dixon in the 1920s. And it just kind of got my interest in the whole thing, just learning about the town. That's the first time I ever heard about the Knights of Pythias in downtown was my grandmother. And I didn't see a picture until I was in my 20s. So it was a quest started of sorts. And later on, my dad saw my interest in it. So anytime he saw somebody had pictures or anything, he worked as a contractor, painting. He would go, and this is before the internet, before technology was so prevalent. He would go and have pictures scanned and like mailboxes or places like that used to do that, and bring me copies. And I started a collection of that and any information, books, anything I could get my hands on. And it's still going. I mean, I'm always looking for something new. And that's where Derek Webster's group, Discovering Dixon County, really has been a godsend.
Chad, you share a lot of old photos on Facebook, on the Discovering Dixon County group site. Talk a little bit about sharing those photos and the information that is exchanged between people, and how somebody could maybe share a photo on that site and maybe find out a lot more information than they knew before.
Well, it's a lot of fun to be able to share it, because, I mean, what good is it if you have them and you can't really spread the news? Of course, you never know enough. It seems like there's a never-ending journey to find more information. And the people bring it. That's the great thing about the group. I mean, it just comes in unexpectedly. New photos, new information, stories. Our admins are great. You're one of them. I've had the good fortune of being one. Chuck Poole has really put a lot of great articles on there and maps, like survey maps and things. And, that's kind of the long and the short of it. Just an ongoing thing, just always looking for new information.
Chad, one of the things that you and I have discussed and researched a lot is the old Dixon Normal College. And at the beginning of the show, I sort of took the listeners through the story of Thaddeus and Hattie Caraway, and a brief little bit of information about the Dixon Normal College. You've also done a little bit of research in that area, so just talk to me a little bit about what you know regarding the old Dixon Normal College.
So Dixon Normal College was something that really spurred me on early, too. The Dixon Herald put out a book in 1995, and it was all about the history of the town, mostly of history and pictures, had captions in it. Reflections of Our Past was the name of the book. And there was a postcard in there of the college, and I'd heard we'd had a college, and I knew we had one, but that's the first picture I'd ever seen of it. It was before it had been remodeled to look like the high school my mom and dad went to. And I was just fascinated by it. I just thought, this is the neatest thing. So it took a lot of years before I could get more and more information. And lo and behold, meeting you and talking to you, it actually filled in a lot of gaps that I just was frustrated. The information said it started in 1884, but then other things said 1891, So you're thinking, well, what's going on here? And let's say there was a Dixon Academy. Well, it became very apparent with the information you had that it kind of came here and absorbed the Dixon Academy. It was kind of like a merging. And all the timelines made sense then. So it's fascinating history. You know, first female senator graduated there.
It's a story that a lot of people in this area just don't know about.
Exactly. It really is. I even talked to some teachers before that weren't familiar with, Hattie Caraway, the first female senator, going there and graduating, as did her husband, Thaddeus Caraway, who was a senator. And, it doesn't take long for information to be forgotten. It just happens. It's natural. And a few generations, something is totally forgotten and lost. And that's why this modern technology is really special, because it can preserve this in a new kind of way.
So after the Dixon Normal College closed, the campus became the Dixon High School. And so the Dixon High School opens in 1919, and they had a football team. And before the Dragons, they wore maroon jerseys, and they were known as the Maroons. They played on a field that was known as Hake Field, and it was there on campus, and they ended up getting lights by 1937. And I've always just kind of been fascinated by that old campus. Tell me, what do you know about Hake Field?
Oh, yeah. If you go way back, the location, if you look at the school now, the middle school on East College, where the gymnasium is, that's pretty much where Hake Field was. That area, the whole area there is. Before that, that's where the chapel was for the Dixon Normal College. My dad played football. I went to a lot of games, and he said that when you went to Hake Field, around the edges, there were still a lot of big stones that were part of the foundation of the old chapel and the girls' dormitory that was attached to it. And they played there until 1958, and that's when the new field behind the school was built. And I'm believing that would be the time the new gymnasium was built, and they put the field in at the same time. And it's one of those things that again gets lost so easily. Before that, though, when you go back to the high school, say in the 20s and 30s, they played a lot of games at something called McKenzie Field, and that would be where the health department is, West End Avenue. So they had a little bit of a trek to get to the games from the school back then. But that's, again, I've only seen a couple of pictures, and that's something that I'd love to see more of and read more about of. But that was what they did before.
I always wondered why they played their games off campus. Do you have any idea?
I really don't know, unless they had not cleared out an area yet for it. Because, this was before the chapel had been torn down. And that was still being used for the lower grades in the 20s. I know that, because the Hughes sisters that were our neighbors, they went to the lower grades in the old dormitory and chapel building. That's where the teachers were for the lower grades. High school was in the old main building of the college. And sometime after 1930, they started tearing down some of those old buildings. Once the chapel was gone, that's where the Hake Field was put up. And it was there to 58, and the lights and everything, it faced east for anybody that hadn't seen photos of it. And some of the bleachers were up against the school. And it was there till they built the new field. But I've heard lots of stories from old-timers and people my parents' age of going there, and they always described the old school as like Happy Days. They said it was the quintessential American high school. They would have movie days where they would go from the school and see a movie. It would be something like Ten Commandments or name your big epic of the time, whether it be historic or otherwise. And, of course, you had, on one side of the school, the Frosty Jug. On the other side of the school, you had the Dairy Grill. A lot of kids would walk over and have lunch over there if they so chose. And it was just idyllic. It was very much Happy Days. I mean, it was just that kind of postcard life from everything I've heard.
Chad, thanks for coming on the show today. I appreciate you calling in, and I truly appreciate people like you supporting what I'm trying to do with the history.
Well, I think what you're doing is a really important thing. You know, you're carrying on what people like Henry Reagan and Warren Medley, they were always very passionate about the town. And I think it's good to see people, younger generations, doing that. You know, I'm about a decade older than you, but it's good to see people, you know, having that interest and that passion about it, you know, and just, you know, wanting to take part and share that, you know, because as there's more and more people that's moved here, you know, you talk about discovering Dixon County, there'll be people saying, what does that mean? What is it street naming? What used to be here? And it's really good when you can give people answers. You know, people come in, they're moving in, they like the town, they think it's pretty, and when they get history on top of it, well, that's just another little kernel there that adds to it. And I think it's just really good, and I applaud you for that, and your show, and obviously as an educator, I think it's just really important. So kudos.
Thank you, Chad. Call us back soon. And we're back here on the Old Timer Show right here on WDKN. And before we close out the show today, wanted to tell you about a few old timers who are celebrating some milestones. One of our friends is Carl from Carl's Perfect Pig out in White Bluff. Carl, who is age 66, just retired after 34 years of running Carl's Perfect Pig out in White Bluff. It has been a staple out there for a really long time. He made the announcement back in May that he was going to finally retire and step down from running the Perfect Pig, which he has done for several decades, and that was going to be effective June 1st. I talked to Carl on the phone last week. I invited him on the show. He said he'd love to come on, so we expect to get him on soon. But he's had a lot of things going on. There's been a lot of stories that have been written about the Perfect Pig. The Dixon Post, Dixon Herald here in town have written stories. Newspapers and magazines out of Nashville and all over the country have followed the Perfect Pig and have been contacting Carl and writing stories. He opened the Perfect Pig way back on July the 1st, 1988. Now, Carl was originally from West Nashville. He moved to Texas as he was growing up, and he was working out there, and he heard that his aunt, who lived in White Bluff, was going to sell her store. She had an old country store right there in White Bluff, and he had grown up. Carl had grown up going to that store when he lived in West Nashville, and he heard that she was stepping down from running her store after her husband had died, and Carl thought maybe now would be a good time to move back to Tennessee, and so he decided to buy the store and start a barbecue restaurant there. And people from all over the Nashville area came out to White Bluff to enjoy the barbecue for a long time. Guests out at Montgomery Bell State Park and people who went canoeing out at the Harpeth River would come in, and that kept him going for a while, even though he was kind of originally on the outskirts of town. White Bluff got bigger, and he continued his business for a long time. There were some moments when the Perfect Pig sort of went Hollywood. There was the TV show Tennessee Crossroads a few years ago that came out to White Bluff and filmed a TV show about the Perfect Pig. And White Bluff native Anson Mount, who is a famous movie star now, he was recently in Marvel's most recent movie. He plays the character Black Bolt, who's a recurring character there in the Marvel universe. So he's a big-time movie star. He grew up in White Bluff, and he had an appearance on a late-night TV show and brought some Carl's Perfect Pig on national TV and gave the restaurant a plug. So Carl's Perfect Pig has been around for a long time, been loved by a lot of people, and had some really cool moments throughout the history of the show, and I know a lot of people, not just in White Bluff, but in Dixon County and all over Middle Tennessee, have enjoyed going to the Perfect Pig for years. And when Carl was asked, why it was time to retire, he said, the heat and the smoke from the kitchen just kind of get to you after a while. And with summer coming on, he felt like now was the right time. So we just wanted to send a shout out to Carl and thank you for everything that you did out there at the Perfect Pig, and enjoy your retirement. And also was a big story this week, was a couple from Burns who's celebrating 70 years of marriage. I wanted to make mention of them also on the Old Timer Show before we wrap up here. It's William Bug Spicer and his wife Shirley. Bug and Shirley are from live out there in Burns, been living out there for a long time. They are, like I said, celebrating 70 years of marriage. They've been very involved in the community over the years. Bug served as a constable for 25 to 30 years, and Shirley drove school bus for 15 years. So they've always been active members of the community here in Dixon County. And old Bug was born way back in December of 1929. He's 92 years old. And he was born at Vanderbilt Hospital in Nashville, and Shirley was born out at her parents' home out on Parker's Creek right here in Dixon County. They were married in Charlotte in the early 1950s and have been together ever since. Their greatest achievement when they were asked, of course, their family, which is 5 generations now. And so we wish them a happy anniversary from the Old Timer Show here. And Carl from Carl's Perfect Pig, and also Bug and Shirley, we welcome you to come on the show anytime and talk to us here on the Old Timer Show. We always appreciate hearing these wonderful stories of old timers in Dixon County who are celebrating certain milestones and doing things, and we always like to mention them on the show. So that's going to do it for us here on the Old Timer Show today. I want to thank you for listening. I'll be back at 8 o'clock with a edition of Know Your County, so stay tuned for that. Dale Reagan's show is up next, right here